The corridors of Nexus Academy stretched endlessly in all directions, their polished titanium walls reflecting the soft blue glow of bioluminescent lighting strips. Cadet 3rd Class Sethkar pressed his back against the cool metal, his forearms trembling as he clutched his datapad to his chest. The Veltar youth's normally proud crest lay flat against his elongated skull, a sure sign of fear among his species. "Going somewhere, Bug Eyes?" The voice belonged to Thane Chorus, a second year from the warrior caste of Drakmor Prime. His massive frame blocked most of the hallway, casting Sethkar in shadow. Behind him stood 2 other cadets, both grinning with the cruel anticipation of those about to witness violence. Sethkar's translator implant struggled to process his rapid breathing into coherent words. I have permission to access the Advanced Physics Laboratory. Professor Grimm authorized my research proposal on quantum entanglement applications in faster-than-light communication. Thane's laugh rumbled like distant thunder. The Drakmorian stood nearly 3 meters tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the corridor lights. Razor-sharp mandibles clicked together as he leaned down to Sethkar's level. "You think some crusty old human professor's permission means anything here? This is the advanced sector, little bug. Reserved for real warriors, not scrawny scientists who can barely lift their own equipment." The Academy's social hierarchy had been clear since orientation day 6 months ago. Physical prowess determined status, with the warrior castes of various species dominating the top ranks. The Drakmorians, with their natural armor and incredible strength, ruled supreme. Below them came the Corvinian shock troops, followed by the various other militaristic species that made up the Galactic Alliance's elite military training program. Somewhere near the bottom, just above the pure civilian researchers, sat species like the Veltar. Brilliant minds, certainly, but lacking the raw physical power that seemed to matter most in academy culture. Sethkar had learned this lesson repeatedly over his months here, usually through incidents just like this one. "Please," Sethkar whispered, his voice barely audible through the translator. "I just need to run some calculations. The research could help improve communication lag times across the galaxy. It could save lives." "Save lives?" Thane's companion, a scaled Corvinian named Vex, stepped forward. "The only thing that saves lives is strength. Power. The ability to crush your enemies before they can harm your own." He flexed his considerable muscles, each one visible through his form-fitting cadet uniform. "Something weaklings like you will never understand." Sethkar tried to edge sideways along the wall, but the third bully, a multi-limbed hexoid called Crix, moved to block his escape route. The hexoid's 6 arms created an impenetrable barrier, each one ending in hands capable of crushing bone. "Where do you think you're going, insect?" Crix's voice carried the mechanical undertone common to his species. "We're not finished with our conversation." The situation escalated quickly from intimidation to physical threat. Thane reached out with one massive clawed hand and grabbed Sethkar by the front of his uniform, lifting the smaller being off his feet with casual ease. The Veltar's 4 arms flailed uselessly as he was pressed against the wall with enough force to dent the metal plating. "Maybe it's time you learned your place in the natural order," Thane growled. "The strong survive and prosper. The weak serve or suffer. Which category do you think you fall into?" Sethkar's breathing became labored as the pressure increased against his chest. His species' respiratory system was delicate, evolved for the low-gravity, high-oxygen world of Veltar Prime. The crushing force of Thane's grip was already causing damage. Dark spots began appearing at the edges of his vision. "I can't breathe," he managed to gasp out. "That's the point," Vex laughed, moving closer to enjoy the spectacle. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before venturing into areas above your station." The Academy's corridors were usually bustling with activity, but this particular section remained empty. The advanced laboratories were restricted areas, accessible only to upper-year students and those with special permission. Sethkar's research authorization had been a rare exception, granted only because of his exceptional theoretical work in quantum mechanics. Now that privilege was being turned against him. Thane drew back his free hand, claws extended. The Drakmorian's natural weapons were capable of shearing through steel plating. Against Sethkar's fragile biology, they would be devastating. "Let's see if we can convince you to stick to your own kind's areas from now on." The blow began its descent, aimed directly at Sethkar's exposed torso. Time seemed to slow as the Veltar cadet closed his eyes, knowing that his next breath might be his last. The Academy's medical bay was too far away to help, even if someone found him quickly. His research, his dreams of contributing to galactic civilization, would all end here in an empty corridor because he had dared to reach beyond his designated place. But the impact never came. Instead, there was a sharp crack of contact, the sound of chitin meeting something unexpectedly solid. Thane's roar of pain and surprise echoed through the corridor as his arm was suddenly deflected sideways, his claws raking harmlessly across the wall panels instead of their intended target. Zethkar's eyes snapped open to see an impossible sight. A figure barely half Thane's height had somehow appeared between them, one small hand wrapped around the Drakmorian's massive wrist with enough force to completely halt his attack. The newcomer wore a standard cadet uniform, but something about their stance radiated confidence and capability. "I think you dropped this," the figure said calmly, and Zethkar realized with shock that the voice was speaking unaccented galactic standard. No translator implant, which meant this was either a remarkably advanced artificial intelligence or something even more unlikely. A human. The revelation sent ripples of confusion through all four beings present. Humans were mythical figures in most galactic civilizations, ancient precursors who had supposedly helped establish the early alliance before mysteriously withdrawing from galactic affairs centuries ago. Their homeworld's location was classified at the highest levels. Most cadets had never seen one in person. Yet here stood living proof that the legends were real. The human appeared young by galactic standards, though their species' aging patterns were poorly understood. Dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and brown eyes surveyed the scene with calm assessment. Nothing about their appearance suggested the kind of strength needed to stop a Drakmorian warrior's strike. "What are you?" Thane snarled, trying to pull his wrist free. To his obvious shock, the grip remained unbreakable. "Cadet First Class Sarah Chen," she replied matter-of-factly. "And you're assaulting a fellow student in violation of Academy Regulations 12, 15, and 27. Not to mention the basic principles of civilized behavior." Vax and Crix exchanged uncertain glances. First-class rank meant this human was a senior cadet, which should have granted her some authority. But the entire situation defied logic. How could someone so small overpower Thane's genetically enhanced strength? "Impossible," Vex hissed. "No one that size could." His words were cut off as Sarah suddenly shifted her stance. With a fluid motion that seemed to require no effort at all, she twisted Thane's captured arm and sent the massive Drakmorian flying down the corridor. The warrior's armored bulk slammed into the far wall with enough force to crack the reinforced plating. "Biomechanics," Sarah explained conversationally as Thane struggled to regain his footing. "Leverage, pressure points, and efficient force application. Your species relies too heavily on brute strength. Makes you predictable." Crix attempted to flank her with his multiple arms, but Sarah was already moving. She ducked under his grasping limbs and struck upward with 2 fingers extended. The hexoid's nervous system, designed around his 6-limb coordination, suddenly betrayed him as specific nerve clusters were disrupted. He toppled sideways, his arms spasming uncontrollably. "Neural pressure points vary by species," Sarah continued, as if giving a lecture. "But most sentient beings share similar vulnerabilities in their nervous system architecture. The key is understanding anatomy." Vax, the largest remaining threat, hesitated. His Corvinian warrior training told him to attack, but his survival instincts warned against facing an opponent who had just disabled 2 larger enemies with seemingly minimal effort. The contradiction paralyzed him with indecision. Sarah turned her attention to Zethkar, who was still pressed against the wall in shock. "Are you injured?" she asked, her voice becoming notably gentler. "I saw the beginning of that strike. Drakmorian claws can cause severe internal damage." I'm fine," Zethkar managed to stammer. "Thank you. I don't understand how you." "Physics," Sarah replied with a slight smile. "Same principles you're researching, just applied to biological systems instead of quantum particles. Energy, momentum, mass, acceleration. The universe operates by consistent rules, regardless of scale." By now, Thane had recovered enough to stand, though his right arm hung useless at his side. The damage to his pride was clearly greater than any physical injury. "This isn't over, human," he spat. "My clan won't tolerate this insult." "Your clan," Sarah said, her tone becoming noticeably colder, "will be more concerned about explaining why their representative was caught assaulting a fellow cadet in direct violation of Alliance military code. Unless you'd prefer I file an official report?" The threat hung in the air like a live plasma charge. Academy regulations were clear about assault, especially when it involved potential injury to another student. The consequences could include expulsion, criminal charges, and diplomatic incidents between member species. For someone from a warrior caste like Thane, such disgrace would be worse than death. "You have no proof," Vex said weakly, though his voice lacked conviction. Sarah gestured casually toward the ceiling. "Security cameras in every corridor. Audio pickup sensitive enough to record a whispered conversation 3 levels away. The Academy's monitoring systems are quite thorough." She paused meaningfully. "Of course, technical malfunctions do happen sometimes. Equipment failures that corrupt recorded data beyond recovery." The implication was clear. She was offering them a way out, but only if they took it immediately and never repeated their behavior. Thane's mandibles clicked furiously, but he was intelligent enough to recognize a no-win scenario. "Come on," he growled to his companions. "The air down here stinks of weakness anyway." The 3 bullies limped away, Crick still struggling with his disrupted coordination. Their departure left the corridor feeling suddenly peaceful, though tension still crackled in the air like residual energy from a plasma discharge. Zethkar slowly lowered himself from where he had been pressed against the wall, his legs shaking with aftershock adrenaline. "I don't understand any of this," he admitted. "Humans are supposed to be extinct. Or mythical. Or we're just private," Sarah corrected gently. "Earth prefers to observe rather than participate directly in galactic politics. Too much noise, not enough substance. But we do send occasional representatives to institutions like this." "Why help me?" Zethkar's translator conveyed genuine confusion. "You don't even know me. And you've just made enemies of some of the most powerful family lines in the Alliance." Sarah's expression became thoughtful. "Do you know what I studied before coming here?" "Anthropology. The science of understanding different species and cultures. One thing I've learned is that intelligence and worth aren't determined by physical strength or political connections." She gestured toward the datapad still clutched in Zethkar's upper arms. "Your research proposal on quantum entanglement communication was brilliant. I read it when Professor Grimm circulated it to advanced physics students. The mathematical proofs alone were extraordinary, but the practical applications could revolutionize how we coordinate military operations across galactic distances." Zethkar's crest rose slightly, an involuntary sign of pride among his people. You understood it?" "Every equation," Sarah confirmed. "Though I had to look up some of the advanced Veltar notation systems. Your species approaches mathematics from a completely different conceptual framework than most others." "It's fascinating." The corridor had returned to its previous quiet state, but somehow the atmosphere felt completely different. Where minutes before it had been a place of threat and intimidation, it now seemed like a space for genuine intellectual discourse. "I should probably escort you to the laboratory," Sarah continued. "Just to make sure our friends don't decide to try again once their pride stops hurting." As they began walking toward the advanced physics section, Zethkar found himself studying his unexpected savior. Everything about the encounter defied his understanding of galactic civilization. Humans were supposed to be a bridge species, peacekeepers and diplomats who worked behind the scenes to maintain alliance stability. They weren't supposed to be capable warriors who could disable multiple opponents in seconds. "How did you learn to fight like that?" he asked. "Earth has a long history of martial arts," Sarah replied. "When you're smaller and weaker than most of your potential opponents, you learn to use efficiency over force. Plus, growing up on a heavy-gravity world with diverse predator species teaches you to think tactically about survival." "Heavy gravity?" Zethkar's scientific curiosity overrode his social awkwardness. "How heavy?" "Standard Earth gravity is about 2.4 times galactic standard," Sarah said casually. "Most humans who serve off-world go through gradual conditioning to adjust to lower gravity environments. It takes about 6 months to fully adapt without constantly overcompensating for the reduced resistance." The implication staggered Zethkar. If humans routinely lived and developed in gravity nearly 2.5 times what most species considered normal, their bone density, muscle development, and reflexes would be proportionally enhanced. A human operating in standard galactic gravity would possess significant physical advantages, regardless of their apparent size. But that raised even more questions. If your people are naturally stronger and faster, why do you hide? Why not take leadership positions in the Alliance? Sarah's expression became distant, as if she were looking at something far beyond the academy corridors. Because strength isn't the same as wisdom. Earth learned that lesson the hard way, long before we ever reached the stars. Power without restraint leads to destruction. Better to guide from the shadows than rule from a throne. They had reached the entrance to the Advanced Physics Laboratory, its security scanner blinking green as it recognized Zethkar's authorized access. But, the Veltar cadet hesitated before entering, still grappling with everything that had just happened. "Will you get in trouble for this?" he asked. "For interfering with other cadets?" "Only if they're stupid enough to file a complaint," Sarah replied with a slight grin. "And, somehow I doubt they want to explain to their families how they got beaten by someone half their size." The laboratory beyond the security doors represented everything Zethkar had dreamed of since arriving at the academy. Quantum computation matrices, gravitational field generators, and theoretical physics modeling systems that cost more than most planetary defense budgets. It was a sanctuary of pure science, removed from the political and social pressures that dominated other areas of academy life. "Your research really could change everything," Sarah said as they entered the pristine facility. Instantaneous communication across any distance would transform not just military operations, but scientific collaboration, diplomatic relations, even basic commerce. "You're working on something that could benefit every species in the galaxy." Zethkar activated his workstation and began calling up his theoretical models. The complex mathematics filled the air above his console in glowing holographic displays, equations and proofs cascading in intricate patterns that would have been incomprehensible to most observers. But Sarah studied them intently, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions that demonstrated genuine understanding. Her presence transformed the lonely research session Zethkar had anticipated into an engaging collaborative discussion. "The energy requirements are still problematic," he admitted, highlighting a section of his calculations. "Creating stable entanglement pairs at the scale needed for practical communication would require power sources beyond current technology." "What about cascade amplification?" Sarah suggested. "If you could establish a resonance effect between multiple smaller pairs, you might achieve the same results without needing a single massive energy input." Zethkar's forearms moved rapidly across his interface as he began modeling Sarah's suggestion. The mathematics were complex, but the underlying principle was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than brute-forcing the entanglement process, her approach used sophisticated engineering to achieve the same results through accumulated smaller effects. "This could work," he breathed, watching the simulation run through thousands of iterations. "It would require precise timing and incredibly sophisticated control systems, but the energy requirements would be reduced by several orders of magnitude." Hours passed unnoticed as they refined the theoretical framework. Sarah's insights proved invaluable, not just because of her technical knowledge, but because her different species perspective highlighted assumptions and limitations that Zethkar had never questioned. The work was interrupted only when Professor Grimm himself arrived to check on the laboratory's usage. The elderly human educator paused in surprise when he saw both cadets bent over the quantum modeling displays. "Miss Chen," he said with evident pleasure. "I wasn't expecting to see you here today. Though I should have guessed you'd find your way to any serious theoretical work going on in my laboratory." "Professor," Sarah replied respectfully. "I hope you don't mind me observing Cadet Zethkar's research. His approach to quantum entanglement mechanics is genuinely revolutionary." Grimm examined their modified calculations with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades pushing the boundaries of known physics. His expression grew increasingly intrigued as he absorbed the implications of their combined work. "Remarkable," he murmured. "The cascade amplification approach eliminates most of the practical barriers to implementation. This isn't just theoretical anymore, this is engineering." He turned to Zethkar with newfound respect. "Young man, I believe you may have just solved one of the fundamental challenges facing interstellar civilization. With Miss Chen's amplification refinements, your communication system could be deployed within a decade rather than a century." The validation from one of the galaxy's foremost theoretical physicists sent Zethkar's confidence soaring. For the first time since arriving at the academy, he felt like he truly belonged here, not as a tolerated outsider but as a legitimate contributor to the Alliance's scientific advancement. But, even as pride filled him, Zethkar remained acutely aware of how different his day might have ended if Sarah hadn't intervened. The research that was now being praised as potentially revolutionary would never have happened if Thane and his companions had succeeded in their assault. "Thank you," he said quietly to Sarah as Professor Grimm continued examining their work. "For everything. Not just the fight, but this. Making me feel like my ideas matter." Sarah's response was interrupted by an unexpected sound, the sharp whistle that indicated an academy-wide announcement. All three researchers looked up as the communications system activated throughout the laboratory. "All cadets report to designated assembly areas immediately," came the voice of Academy Commandant Vortex, a grizzled Corvinian veteran whose authority was absolute throughout the training facility. "Emergency protocols are now in effect. This is not a drill." The implication sent a chill through everyone present. The Academy's emergency protocols were reserved for genuine crisis situations, hostile attacks, diplomatic incidents, or catastrophic system failures that threatened the entire facility. Professor Grimm's expression became grim as he began securing the laboratory's sensitive equipment. "You two need to get to your assigned rally points," he commanded. "Emergency protocols mean potential evacuation. Take only essential personal items." As they hurried through corridors now filled with confused and anxious cadets, Zethkar couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, the day's events were connected to this new crisis. The Academy had survived for over a century without major incident. Was it truly coincidence that emergency protocols would be activated on the same day that a human cadet had revealed herself by protecting him from assault? The questions multiplied as they reached the main assembly hall, where hundreds of cadets from dozens of species were gathering in organized formations. But answers, Zethkar realized, would have to wait. Whatever was happening at Nexus Academy, he had the distinct feeling that their quiet academic sanctuary was about to become something much more dangerous. The main assembly hall of Nexus Academy could accommodate nearly 3,000 beings at full capacity, its adaptive seating configurations automatically adjusting to the diverse anatomical requirements of the Alliance's member species. Today, that vast space thrummed with nervous energy as cadets filed into their designated positions, the normal chatter of academic life replaced by tense whispers and speculation. Zethkar found his position among the other science track cadets, his forearms unconsciously mirroring the defensive postures of his fellow Veltar. Across the hall, he could see Sarah taking her place among the senior cadets, her human physiology making her stand out starkly against the varied alien forms surrounding her. Even now, hours after their encounter, he found it difficult to believe that such an unremarkable-looking being had single-handedly defeated three of the Academy's most formidable bullies. Commandant Vortex strode onto the central platform, his massive Corvinian frame radiating the kind of authority that came from decades of combat experience. Battle scars crisscrossed his scaled hide, each one representing a conflict where his leadership had meant the difference between victory and catastrophe. When he spoke, his voice carried easily throughout the entire assembly hall without amplification. "Cadets of Nexus Academy," he began, his tone grave enough to silence even the most anxious whispers. "At 1400 hours today, we received a priority communication from Alliance High Command. Long-range sensors have detected an unidentified fleet moving through the Kepler expanse at unprecedented velocity." The implications hit the assembly like a physical blow. The Kepler expanse was a neutral zone between Alliance space and the territories controlled by the Hegemony, a militaristic coalition of species that had been engaged in Cold War tensions with the Alliance for over 50 years. Any significant fleet movement in that region represented a potential act of aggression. Initial sensor readings indicate approximately 200 vessels of unknown configuration, Vortex continued. Their technology appears to be several generations beyond current Alliance or Hegemony capabilities. Energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. Murmurs of fear rippled through the assembled cadets. An unknown fleet with superior technology represented every military strategist's nightmare scenario. The Alliance's defensive preparations were based on known threats and established tactical doctrines. An enemy with completely foreign capabilities could potentially overwhelm their defenses before effective countermeasures could be developed. "The Academy has been placed on high alert as a precautionary measure," Vortex explained. "While we are located well within Alliance core territory, our strategic importance as the primary military training facility makes us a potential target for any hostile force seeking to disrupt our defensive capabilities." Zethkar's mind raced as he processed the information. Nexus Academy housed the future leadership of the Alliance military, along with cutting-edge research facilities and prototype technologies that were decades ahead of general deployment. In enemy hands, the knowledge contained within the Academy's databases could shift the balance of power throughout the galaxy. "All academic schedules are suspended indefinitely," the Commandant announced. Cadets will be organized into emergency response teams based on their specializations and training levels.
Combat track students will assist with defensive preparations.
Science and engineering tracks will support technical analysis of the unknown threat. A new voice suddenly echoed through the hall as Professor Grimm stepped forward to address the assembly. The elderly human's presence seemed to calm some of the ambient tension, his reputation for level-headed brilliance well known throughout the academy. "I want to emphasize that we are dealing with an unknown situation," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had advised Alliance leadership for decades.
Unknown does not necessarily mean hostile.
It's entirely possible that we're encountering a previously undiscovered civilization making first contact, or refugees fleeing some catastrophe beyond our current understanding. But, even as Grimm spoke words of caution and measured response, Zethkar noticed that Sarah's expression had become distant and thoughtful. The human cadet was staring at something beyond the assembly hall, her brown eyes focused on calculations or considerations that remained invisible to everyone around her. The formal briefing continued with detailed assignments and emergency protocols, but Zethkar found his attention drawn repeatedly to Sarah's obvious preoccupation. Something about the situation was triggering responses in the human that went beyond normal cadet concerns. When the assembly finally dispersed, Zethkar made his way through the crowd to where Sarah was gathering her equipment. Up close, he could see that her earlier calm confidence had been replaced by a tension that seemed to radiate from her entire posture. "You know something," he said without preamble.
"About the fleet. About what's really happening."
Sarah's eyes snapped to his face, and, for a moment he saw something that looked almost like fear flicker across her features. "I have suspicions," she admitted quietly.
"Nothing confirmed.
But, the energy signature descriptions, they match theoretical projections from some very classified Earth research."
The admission sent a chill down Zethkar's spine. If the unknown fleet was somehow connected to human technology, the implications could be catastrophic for galactic stability. Earth's withdrawal from direct Alliance involvement had always been presented as a peaceful isolation, not a prelude to technological development that could threaten established civilizations.
"We need to talk," Sarah continued, glancing around to ensure their conversation wasn't being overheard.
"But, not here. Too many sensors, too much monitoring. Meet me in Laboratory 7 in 20 minutes.
It's shielded against surveillance." Before Zethkar could respond, she had vanished into the crowd of dispersing cadets with the same fluid efficiency she had demonstrated against Thane and his companions. The Veltar found himself standing alone in the emptying assembly hall, grappling with the growing realization that his quiet academic life was about to become infinitely more complicated. Laboratory 7 occupied a restricted section of the Academy's research complex, its experimental quantum isolation systems creating a pocket of space that was effectively invisible to most forms of electronic surveillance. When Zethkar arrived, he found Sarah already there, her fingers dancing across multiple interface panels with practiced efficiency. "What are you doing?" he asked, watching as streams of data flowed across the laboratory's displays. Cross-referencing the fleet's energy signatures with theoretical models from Earth's deep research archives, Sarah replied without looking up from her work. "It's taking longer than I hoped because most of the relevant data is classified beyond my access level."
"Your access level?"
Zethkar moved closer to examine the displays, his scientific curiosity overriding his social discomfort.
"What exactly is your access level?" Sarah's hands paused momentarily over the controls. "Higher than a normal cadet should have," she admitted. "Earth doesn't send random citizens to institutions like this.
Every human who serves in the Alliance is here for specific reasons." The data stream suddenly converged into a recognizable pattern, and Sarah's expression became grim. "There," she said, highlighting specific energy readings.
"Quantum cascade propulsion systems. Dimensional fold containment fields. Artificial intelligence coordination networks. This isn't just advanced technology, this is Earth technology."
"But, you said Earth was peaceful," Zethkar protested.
"That humans preferred observation to direct involvement."
"Official Earth policy is peaceful isolation," Sarah corrected.
"But, Earth has always maintained contingency plans for scenarios where galactic civilization faced existential threats. This fleet represents one of those contingencies becoming active." She pulled up additional displays showing fleet movement patterns and projected trajectories. "Look at the formation structure. They're not moving like invaders or explorers. This is a response fleet, organized for crisis intervention."
Zethkar studied the tactical displays with growing unease. The fleet's organization was indeed defensive rather than aggressive, but that raised even more disturbing questions.
Response to what? What kind of crisis would require Earth to reveal military capabilities they've kept hidden for centuries? Something bad enough to override centuries of non-intervention policy, Sarah replied grimly.
Something that threatens not just the alliance or the hegemony, but the fundamental stability of galactic civilization itself.
Their conversation was interrupted by an alert chime from the laboratory's communication system. Professor Grimm's voice emerged from the speakers with obvious urgency. All senior research cadets report to Command Center Delta immediately. We have a developing situation that requires immediate analysis. Sarah began securing their data displays with rapid efficiency.
We need to go, she said.
But, Zethkar, don't mention our conversation to anyone else. Not yet. If I'm right about what's happening, there are going to be some very difficult decisions ahead. Command Center Delta was normally off limits to cadets, reserved for Academy leadership and visiting Alliance officials.
Today, however, the space buzzed with activity as senior cadets worked alongside faculty members to analyze incoming data streams from across the galaxy. The main display showed a real-time tactical overview of known space, with the mysterious fleet marked as a slowly moving cluster of red indicators near the edge of Alliance territory. But, as Zethkar watched, additional contacts began appearing throughout the display, not ships, but something else entirely.
Dimensional anomalies, Professor Grimm explained as he noticed Zethkar's confusion.
Space-time distortions appearing simultaneously across multiple star systems.
Whatever caused them is beyond our current understanding of physics. A Corvinian tactical specialist stepped forward to address the assembled analysts.
The anomalies began manifesting approximately 6 hours ago, but we're only detecting them now because their effects are subtle at first. They appear to be growing stronger and more widespread with each passing hour. Sarah moved to one of the analysis stations and began correlating the anomaly data with the fleet's movement patterns.
Her fingers flew across the interface with the kind of focused intensity that Zethkar recognized from their earlier research collaboration.
Professor, Sarah called out, her voice carefully controlled. I'm seeing correlation patterns between the anomaly locations and historical sites of significance to various galactic civilizations.
Ancient ruins, abandoned megastructures, extinct civilization homeworlds.
Grimm hurried over to examine her analysis, his expression becoming increasingly troubled as he absorbed the implications.
You're suggesting the anomalies are targeting specific locations rather than appearing randomly?
More than that, Sarah replied. The targeting pattern suggests intelligence. Something or someone is deliberately activating whatever is causing these distortions, and they're choosing targets based on archaeological and historical significance.
The command center fell silent as everyone present grappled with the implications.
Random spatial anomalies would be dangerous enough, but a deliberate attack on historically significant sites suggested an enemy with comprehensive knowledge of galactic civilization and the ability to strike anywhere within known space.
How long do we have? Commandant Vortex asked grimly. Sarah's calculations painted an increasingly dire picture.
At current expansion rates, the anomalies will begin affecting inhabited systems within 48 hours.
Major population centers could be at risk within a week. And the unknown fleet? Their current trajectory will bring them into Alliance space in approximately 18 hours, Sarah reported.
But, sir, I don't think they're the source of the anomalies. Their formation and movement patterns suggest they're responding to the threat, not creating it.
Vortex's scarred features betrayed no emotion as he processed the information. Speculation, Cadet. We cannot assume benevolent intent from an unidentified military force, regardless of their apparent behavior.
But, even as the Commandant spoke, new data began flooding into the command center. Deep space monitoring stations throughout Alliance territory were reporting the same phenomenon. Ancient ruins and archaeological sites were beginning to exhibit energy readings that defied explanation. On the world of Kepler-7, the massive stone pyramids built by an extinct civilization 10,000 years ago were glowing with an eerie blue light.
On the gas giant Nexus Prime, the abandoned orbital habitats of the predecessor race were showing signs of renewed activity after millennia of silence.
It's not random, Zethkar said suddenly, his voice cutting through the confused chatter filling the command center. The pattern isn't just targeting historically significant sites.
It's activating dormant technology left behind by extinct civilizations. All eyes turned to the young Veltar as he continued his analysis.
The predecessors, the builders, the architects, all the mysterious ancient races that vanished before current galactic civilization developed. Their ruins are scattered throughout known space, and we've never understood how their technology worked.
Professor Grimm's expression became thoughtful as he followed Zethkar's reasoning. You're suggesting that something is deliberately activating ancient technology across the galaxy simultaneously?
Not just activating it, Zethkar replied, his forearms gesturing excitedly as his scientific enthusiasm overcame his social anxiety.
Connecting it.
Look at the energy readings from different sites, they're synchronized.
Whatever is happening, it's creating a galaxy-wide network using technology that's thousands of years old. Sarah's face had gone pale as she absorbed the implications of Zethkar's theory.
A network that size, using quantum entanglement principles at a scale we're only just beginning to understand, it could be designed for anything.
Communication, transportation, energy transmission. Or destruction, Vortex added grimly. The tactical displays updated again, showing new anomaly formations appearing throughout hegemony space as well.
Whatever was happening, it was affecting the entire galaxy without regard for political boundaries or territorial claims.
Commandant, Sarah said suddenly, her voice carrying an edge of urgency that made everyone in the command center pay attention.
I need to request immediate communication access to Earth Command Authority.
Priority Alpha clearance. The request sent shock waves through the assembled personnel. Priority Alpha clearance was reserved for genuine existential threats to galactic civilization.
No cadet, regardless of their background or connections, should have had access to such authorization.
On what authority? Vortex demanded. Emergency Protocol 7, Sarah replied, meeting his gaze steadily.
Activation of dormant predecessor technology constitutes a potential extinction-level event requiring immediate Earth intervention.
Zethkar watched the exchange with growing amazement.
Sarah wasn't just a cadet with unusual capabilities, she was some kind of official Earth representative with authority to activate emergency protocols that most Alliance officials probably didn't even know existed. Vortex stared at her for a long moment, clearly weighing the implications of granting such a request.
Finally, he nodded grimly. Granted.
But, this communication will be monitored and recorded by Academy security. Understood, Sarah replied, already moving toward the command center's quantum communication array. As she began establishing the encrypted connection to Earth, Zethkar found himself wondering what other secrets his new human friend was keeping. The day had already shattered most of his assumptions about galactic civilization. How many more revelations were waiting to emerge? The quantum communication array hummed to life, its exotic matter components creating a direct entanglement link across the thousands of light-years separating the Academy from Earth. When the connection stabilized, Sarah's demeanor underwent a subtle but noticeable change, becoming more formal and precise. Earth Command Authority, this is Agent Chen reporting from Nexus Academy, she said, her voice carrying none of the casual friendliness Zethkar had come to associate with her. Emergency Protocol 7 activation requested.
Confirmation code Delta 77 Alpha.
The response came in the form of a synthesized voice that somehow managed to convey both vast intelligence and complete emotional detachment.
Agent Chen, Emergency Protocol 7 confirmed.
Current threat assessment indicates predecessor network activation at 87% of documented sites.
Earth Response Fleet Omega is currently 43 hours from Academy position.
Understood, Sarah replied.
What are our operational parameters? Full disclosure is authorized for current analysis team. Galactic civilization is facing potential extinction-level event.
All available resources are to be dedicated to threat assessment and mitigation.
The command center fell completely silent as the implications sank in.
Earth hadn't just been monitoring galactic affairs from a distance, they had been preparing for catastrophic scenarios that no one else had even considered possible.
Sir, Sarah said, turning back to address Commandant Vortex.
I need to brief everyone present on what Earth knows about the predecessor civilizations and why their technology represents such a significant threat.
Vortex nodded grimly. Proceed.
Sarah activated the command center's main holographic display, calling up images and data that had clearly never been accessible through normal Alliance channels. The display showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy marked with thousands of sites throughout known space. The civilizations we call the predecessors weren't separate species that evolved independently, she began. They were part of a single, galaxy-spanning culture that existed approximately 12,000 years ago. Their technology was based on principles that current science is only beginning to understand: quantum consciousness integration, dimensional engineering, and artificial intelligence networks that spanned interstellar distances. The display zoomed in to show detailed scans of predecessor ruins, revealing technological complexity that dwarfed even the most advanced current Alliance capabilities. They disappeared suddenly, and completely, leaving behind only their ruins and dormant technology. Earth's xenoarchaeological teams have been studying these sites for centuries, trying to understand what happened to them and why they left their galaxy-wide infrastructure intact but deactivated. Professor Grimm leaned forward intently.
And now that infrastructure is reactivating itself? Not reactivating, Sarah corrected. Being reactivated by something else.
Something that understands predecessor technology well enough to bring their entire network online simultaneously. Sethkar's scientific mind grappled with the implications. A galaxy-wide network of quantum-integrated artificial intelligence systems, using technology thousands of years more advanced than anything we currently understand. If something hostile gained control of that, they could potentially manipulate spacetime itself on a cosmic scale.
Exactly, Sarah confirmed grimly. And, based on the current activation pattern, we estimate complete network integration within 72 hours. What happens then? Vortex asked.
Sarah's expression became distant, as if she were looking at possibilities too terrible to fully comprehend.
Earth's projections suggest multiple potential scenarios.
Best case, whoever is controlling the network simply demonstrates their power and makes demands.
Worst case. Worst case? Grimm prompted.
Complete restructuring of galactic spacetime to suit the controller's preferences. Every inhabited world, every space station, every living being in the galaxy becomes subject to manipulation by an intelligence with essentially godlike technological capabilities. The command center erupted in chaos as the full scope of the threat became clear. This wasn't a military invasion or a political crisis, it was a potential end to free will for every sentient being in the galaxy. But, through the confusion and fear, Sethkar found himself focusing on a different aspect of the situation. The unknown fleet, he said suddenly. The Earth response ships.
They're not coming to fight the predecessor network, are they? They're coming to help us understand it. Sarah nodded approvingly. Earth has been preparing for this possibility for centuries.
We have technology and knowledge that the Alliance lacks, but we don't have the numbers or the diverse perspectives needed to solve a problem this complex.
That's why we need to work together. As if summoned by her words, new contacts appeared on the tactical display.
The mysterious fleet had changed course and was now approaching the Academy at maximum velocity. Whatever was about to happen, Sethkar realized, their quiet educational sanctuary was about to become the center of a galaxy-spanning crisis that would determine the fate of every living being in known space.
The Earth response fleet emerged from quantum-fold space with a precision that defied conventional understanding of faster-than-light navigation.
Where most vessels required complex calculations and gradual deceleration to safely transition back to normal space, the human ships simply materialized in perfect formation around Nexus Academy as if they had always been there. Sethkar pressed his face against the observation deck's reinforced transparasteel, watching in fascination as the human vessels took up protective positions around the Academy. Their design was unlike anything in Alliance databases: smooth, organic curves that seemed to flow like liquid metal, with no visible weapons systems or traditional propulsion arrays. Yet something about their presence radiated capability and barely contained power.
Impressive, aren't they?
Sarah's voice came from behind him, and he turned to find her studying the fleet with an expression of professional appreciation mixed with obvious pride.
I don't understand how they're maintaining position, Sethkar admitted.
There are no visible thruster ports, no gravitational field generators.
By conventional physics, they shouldn't be able to maintain such precise formation in a complex gravitational environment. Conventional physics has limitations, Sarah replied with a slight smile. Earth learned long ago that the universe operates according to principles that most species haven't discovered yet. We've had a few extra centuries to explore the deeper implications of quantum mechanics and consciousness integration. Through the observation deck's communication system, Commandant Vortex's voice announced the arrival of a diplomatic shuttle from the Earth fleet. The Academy's senior staff was assembling in the main conference chamber to meet with the human representatives, and all analysis team members were ordered to attend. As they made their way through corridors filled with nervous cadets and bustling faculty, Sethkar found himself grappling with the rapid transformation of everything he thought he understood about galactic civilization.
24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been completing his research project without interference from Academy bullies.
Now he was apparently part of an emergency response team dealing with a threat that could end free will throughout the galaxy.
The main conference chamber had been reconfigured to accommodate beings of various sizes and atmospheric requirements, but today it hosted an unprecedented gathering. Alliance officials, Academy leadership, senior faculty, and selected cadets filled the space, while holographic displays showed real-time updates from across the galaxy as more predecessor sites continued their mysterious activation.
When the Earth representatives entered, the chamber fell completely silent.
There were 3 of them, and, like Sarah, they possessed the unremarkable appearance that Zethkar was learning to associate with deceptively dangerous capabilities. Their leader, introduced as Director Harrison, carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected entire civilizations. "Thank you for your cooperation," Director Harrison began, his voice carrying easily throughout the chamber without amplification.
"I know this situation raises many questions about Earth's role in galactic affairs.
I'll try to provide answers while we work together to address the current crisis." He activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy-wide network of predecessor sites, now nearly 60% active and growing stronger by the hour. 12,000 years ago, the civilization we call the predecessors achieved something that no species has managed since: true unity of purpose across an entire galaxy. They created a network of quantum-integrated consciousness that allowed instantaneous communication, coordination, and collaboration between billions of beings across millions of worlds. The implications sent murmurs of amazement through the assembled officials. Current galactic civilization struggled with communication delays and coordination problems across even small stellar regions. The idea of instant galaxy-wide unity seemed almost mythical.
"What happened to them?" Professor Grimm asked.
"They transcended," Director Harrison replied simply. "When a species achieves true unity of consciousness, physical existence becomes optional. The predecessors chose to evolve beyond material reality, leaving behind their technology as a safeguard for future civilizations."
"A safeguard against what?" Commandant Vortex demanded. The director's expression became grim. "Against the same force that drove them to transcendence in the first place.
An intelligence from beyond our reality that seeks to consume or control any sufficiently advanced civilization. The predecessors called it the Hunger, and they built their network specifically to defend against its eventual return." Zethkar felt a chill run through his forearms as the true scope of the crisis became clear.
"You're saying that something from outside our reality is trying to take control of the predecessor network?"
"Not trying," Director Harrison corrected.
"Succeeding."
The Hunger has been systematically infiltrating and activating dormant predecessor sites for the past several months.
We estimate that complete network integration is now less than 60 hours away. "And, when that happens?"
Alliance Representative Korth asked, her scaled features betraying obvious fear. "The Hunger will have access to technology capable of rewriting the fundamental laws of physics within our local galactic cluster," Harrison explained. "Every inhabited world, every sentient being, every thought and dream becomes subject to its control.
Galactic civilization as we know it will cease to exist." The conference chamber erupted in chaos as the full implications sank in. This wasn't just a military threat or a political crisis, it was potential extinction for every form of life in the galaxy. Traditional defensive strategies were meaningless against an enemy that could manipulate reality itself. "What can we do?"
Grimm asked, his scientific mind already working on potential solutions despite the overwhelming scope of the problem. "The predecessors left us tools," Harrison replied, calling up new displays that showed detailed schematics of technology that seemed almost magical in its complexity. Hidden throughout their network are control nodes designed to allow worthy successor civilizations to take command of the system. But activating these nodes requires something the Hunger lacks.
"Which is?" Sarah prompted, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer.
"Diversity," Harrison explained. "The predecessor network was built by a unified consciousness, but it can only be truly controlled by minds that think in fundamentally different ways. No single species has the cognitive diversity necessary to operate the control systems effectively." Zethkar's scientific intuition suddenly provided a flash of understanding. "That's why you've stayed hidden," he said to Harrison. "Earth has been waiting for galactic civilization to develop sufficient diversity and cooperation to serve as collective network operators."
"Precisely," Harrison confirmed with obvious approval.
Humanity alone cannot save the galaxy from the hunger. But, a coordinated effort by diverse species working together that might be sufficient to take control of the predecessor network before the hunger can complete its infiltration.
The tactical displays updated again, showing the current status of network integration.
Nearly 70% of known sites were now active, and the rate of activation was accelerating. Whatever window of opportunity existed for intervention, it was closing rapidly.
How do we access these control nodes?
Vortex asked. That's where it gets complicated, Harrison admitted.
The nodes aren't physical locations, they exist in quantum consciousness space.
Accessing them requires individuals capable of quantum thought integration, which is extremely rare and dangerous.
Sarah stepped forward with obvious reluctance.
Sir, I volunteer for consciousness integration protocols.
Absolutely not, Harrison replied immediately.
Agent Chen, you know the casualty rates for untrained consciousness integration.
We cannot afford to lose you to a procedure that has less than 15% survival probability.
Zethkar found himself speaking before his social anxiety could stop him.
What about collaborative integration?
All eyes in the chamber turned to him as he continued nervously. In my quantum entanglement research, I discovered that consciousness resonance between different species creates stability effects that don't exist in single-mind integration.
Harrison's expression became thoughtful. Explain.
If you pair minds from different species, beings whose thought patterns are fundamentally incompatible, the quantum interference creates a stabilizing field that protects both participants during consciousness integration, Zethkar explained, his scientific excitement overriding his nervousness. It's the same principle Sarah suggested for energy cascade amplification, just applied to mental processes instead of physical systems. Director Harrison exchanged glances with his fellow Earth representatives before nodding slowly.
The theory is sound, he admitted.
But, it's never been tested with something as complex as predecessor network integration. Then, we test it now, Sarah said firmly. Because the alternative is watching everything we know get consumed by an intelligence that views free will as an inefficiency to be corrected. Professor Grimm leaned forward intently.
What would you need for this collaborative integration attempt? Volunteers from multiple species willing to link their consciousness temporarily, Harrison replied.
Each species contributes a different cognitive framework, creating a collective mind diverse enough to operate predecessor technology while maintaining enough stability to survive the process. I volunteer, Zethkar said immediately, surprising himself with his boldness.
As do I, came a voice from the back of the chamber. To everyone's amazement, it was Thane Chorus, the Drakmorian who had assaulted Zethkar just yesterday.
The massive warrior's expression was grim but determined as he stepped forward.
What are you doing? Vex hissed, clearly confused by his friend's apparent betrayal.
Something more important than personal pride, Thane replied, his mandibles clicking with obvious discomfort at the admission.
If the galaxy is really facing extinction, then old grudges become meaningless. More volunteers began stepping forward, cadets from dozens of species, academy faculty, even alliance officials. Within minutes, Harrison had more volunteers than the experimental procedure could safely accommodate.
We'll need to select participants based on cognitive diversity and consciousness compatibility, he explained. The integration network requires specific thought pattern combinations to achieve stability. Sarah moved to one of the analysis stations and began running compatibility assessments on the volunteer profiles. Her fingers danced across the interface with practiced efficiency as she correlated genetic markers, psychological profiles, and neurological scan data from Academy medical records. I'm showing optimal compatibility clusters, she announced after several minutes of intense calculation.
Zethkar's Veltar analytical framework pairs well with Drakmorian tactical processing and human intuitive integration.
If we add Corvinian strategic thinking and hexoid pattern recognition, we should have sufficient diversity for network access. Director Harrison studied her analysis with obvious concern.
Five-way consciousness integration has never been attempted. The risk of permanent psychological damage or death is extremely high. Higher than the risk of galactic extinction? Zethkar asked quietly.
The question hung in the air like a charged particle waiting to discharge. Everyone present understood that they were facing an impossible choice between certain death and potential salvation at the cost of individual lives.
How long do we have? Commandant Vortex asked.
Network integration is accelerating, Harrison reported, consulting his own displays.
Current projections show complete hunger control in approximately 56 hours. We need to attempt consciousness integration within the next 12 hours to have any chance of success. Then, we begin preparation immediately, Vortex declared. Academy resources are at your full disposal. As the conference dispersed into smaller working groups, Zethkar found himself approached by Thane. The massive Drakmorian looked uncomfortable, his normal aggressive confidence replaced by something that might have been uncertainty. Why did you volunteer? Zethkar asked, genuinely curious about the warrior's motivations.
Yesterday, I was ready to seriously injure you because you seemed weak, Thane replied bluntly. Today, you're volunteering to risk your life to save beings you've never met on worlds you'll never visit.
That kind of strength. I've never seen anything like it. The admission clearly cost the Drakmorian considerable effort.
His species culture emphasized physical dominance and personal glory above all else. Acknowledging weakness or admitting error went against everything he had been taught since hatching.
It's not strength, Zethkar replied honestly. It's just what needs to be done. Sometimes the right choice is also the only choice. That's what I mean, Thane said quietly. Real warriors don't fight because they enjoy violence.
They fight because someone has to protect those who can't protect themselves. I forgot that until I watched you volunteer for something that could kill you just to help strangers. Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah, who had been monitoring their interaction with obvious interest.
The pre-integration preparation will take several hours, she informed them.
You should both get some rest and nutrition. Consciousness integration is mentally exhausting even under ideal conditions. As they made their way toward the Academy's medical facilities for pre-procedure monitoring, Zethkar reflected on how completely his world had changed in the space of a single day. Yesterday, his greatest ambition had been completing his theoretical research without getting beaten up by Academy bullies. Now he was preparing to risk his sanity and, possibly his life to save galactic civilization from an entity that existed beyond normal reality. The medical preparation proved to be extensive and uncomfortable. Earth's consciousness integration technology required precise mapping of each participant's neural pathways, psychological profiles, and quantum consciousness signatures. Hours of scanning, testing, and calibration left all 5 volunteers exhausted before the actual procedure even began. But, as the preparation continued, something unexpected began happening among the volunteer group. The shared danger and common purpose broke down species barriers that had seemed insurmountable just hours before. Thane found himself discussing tactical theory with Crix, the hexoid whose nervous system he had nearly damaged during their previous encounter. Vex and the Corvinian strategist Crix discovered mutual respect for each other's approaches to complex problem solving. Most surprisingly, Zethkar found that his crippling social anxiety had largely vanished when the stakes became truly important. When facing potential galactic extinction, worrying about what others thought of him seemed absurdly petty. Integration chamber is ready, Director Harrison announced as the medical teams finished their preparations. Remember, once consciousness integration begins, you'll be experiencing reality through 5 different cognitive frameworks simultaneously. The sensation can be overwhelming, but you must maintain focus on accessing the predecessor control nodes. The integration chamber itself was a marvel of Earth engineering, a spherical room lined with quantum field generators and consciousness amplification matrices that seemed to bend spacetime around the central platform. As the 5 volunteers took their positions in specially designed interface chairs, Zethkar felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. Beginning integration sequence, Harrison announced from the control room. Consciousness barriers going offline in 3, 2, 1. The sensation of mental boundaries dissolving was unlike anything Zethkar had ever experienced. Suddenly, his careful Veltar analytical processes were joined by Thane's aggressive tactical instincts, Sarah's intuitive problem-solving capabilities, Crix's pattern recognition matrices, and Grix's strategic overview thinking. 5 completely different ways of perceiving reality merged into a single, impossibly complex consciousness that was somehow greater than the sum of its parts. Through their merged awareness, they could suddenly perceive the predecessor network as it truly existed, not as ancient ruins scattered across the galaxy, but as a living, breathing entity of pure consciousness that spanned dimensions beyond normal spacetime. And, throughout that vast network, they could see the hunger spreading like a plague, converting nodes of pure knowledge into instruments of control and domination. But, they could also see something else: dormant control pathways left behind by the predecessors, waiting for minds diverse enough to activate them.
The path forward was clear, but it would require perfect coordination between 5 fundamentally incompatible thought processes. The real work was about to begin. The merged consciousness that was simultaneously Zethkar, Sarah, Thane, Crix, and Grix existed in a state of reality that had no equivalent in normal experience. Through their combined awareness, they could perceive the predecessor network not as scattered archaeological sites, but as a vast neural network spanning the galaxy, each node pulsing with quantum information that transcended the boundaries between matter, energy, and consciousness. The hunger moved through this network like a virus through organic tissue, systematically converting each node from its original purpose, the free sharing of knowledge and consciousness, into instruments of domination and control. Where predecessor nodes had once facilitated voluntary communion between diverse minds, the hunger was creating channels for forced mental subjugation. Analysis pattern detected at * came the thought stream that was distinctly Zethkar's analytical approach, but somehow enhanced by the other consciousness patterns. The hunger operates by simplification. It reduces complex quantum consciousness states to binary control structures. Voluntary becomes mandatory. Diversity becomes uniformity. Tactical assessment confirms responded Thane's militant perspective, now enriched with strategic thinking patterns from Grix and Sarah's intuitive leaps. The enemy's weakness is its inability to comprehend voluntary cooperation between fundamentally different minds. It can only understand dominance hierarchies. Through their shared perception, they could see the control nodes the predecessors had hidden throughout the network, quantum consciousness locks that could only be opened by minds operating in perfect voluntary harmony while maintaining their fundamental differences. It was a safeguard against exactly the kind of forced unity the hunger represented. Access pathway identified. Crix's pattern recognition capabilities announced, highlighting a route through the network that would lead to the primary control nodes. But the hunger has positioned defensive constructs at each junction point. Direct approach will trigger hostile response. The defensive constructs were unlike anything in galactic military experience. Rather than physical weapons or energy barriers, they were pure consciousness traps designed to capture and absorb any mind that attempted unauthorized access to the network. The hunger had learned to use the predecessor's own safeguards against potential liberators. Alternative approach required. Sarah's intuitive problem-solving suggested. The hunger expects single-mind infiltration attempts. It has no protocols for dealing with voluntary collective consciousness that maintains individual integrity. Through their merged awareness, they began formulating a strategy that played to their unique advantages. Rather than attempting to sneak past the hunger's defenses, they would approach openly as exactly what they were: 5 different minds working in perfect cooperation without surrendering their individual natures. The first control node lay deep within the network's core, accessible only through a pathway that wound through dozens of hunger-controlled sectors. As they began their approach, the 5-mind collective could feel hostile attention focusing on their presence. Unknown consciousness pattern detected. Came a thought stream that definitely did not belong to any of them. The mental voice carried undertones of vast intelligence coupled with complete emotional emptiness. Interference with network integration will not be tolerated. The attack came as a wave of crushing mental pressure designed to force their individual consciousness patterns into conformity with hunger protocols. It was like being subjected to psychological torture while having one's personal identity slowly dissolved into a collective that offered no individual recognition or value. But the 5-mind structure held. Each consciousness pattern reinforced the others, creating stability through diversity rather than uniformity. Where the hunger sought to impose single-minded conformity, they responded with voluntary cooperation that became stronger through difference rather than weaker. Impossible. The hunger's response carried notes of genuine confusion. Individual consciousness patterns cannot maintain integrity during collective integration. Unity requires uniformity. Unity requires understanding. Sarah's voice pattern responded through their merged consciousness. Uniformity is just the simplest form of unity, not the only one. As they penetrated deeper into the network, more hunger constructs moved to intercept them. Each attack was different, targeted at specific weaknesses the hunger had identified in their individual consciousness patterns. Zethkar's analytical nature was assaulted with paradoxes designed to lock his thinking in infinite loops. Thane's warrior instincts were bombarded with scenarios requiring impossible tactical choices. Sarah's intuitive leaps were trapped in webs of logical contradiction. But each attack failed because the 5-mind collective could compensate for individual weaknesses through collaborative strength. When Zethkar's analysis became trapped in logical paradoxes,
Thane's direct action orientation cut through the confusion. When Sarah's intuition led into conceptual dead ends, Crix's pattern recognition provided alternative pathways. Adaptation protocol required *, the Hunger's mental voice announced, and, suddenly, the nature of their attacks changed. Rather than targeting individuals, the Hunger began attempting to corrupt their cooperation itself, inserting thoughts designed to create mistrust and conflict between the merged consciousness patterns. Thane's warrior nature makes him inherently violent. Came whispers directed specifically at Zethkar's awareness. He will eventually turn on you as he did before. Zethkar's weakness makes the group vulnerable. Similar whispers targeted Thane's consciousness. His presence reduces overall effectiveness, but the collaborative integration held firm. Each consciousness pattern had access to the genuine thoughts and intentions of the others, making deceptive manipulation impossible. They could feel each other's fears, doubts, and uncertainties, but also their genuine commitment to the mission and to protecting each other's integrity. Deception protocol ineffective. The Hunger acknowledged with what might have been frustration. Voluntary consciousness merger creates immunity to standard corruption techniques. They had reached the first major control node, a quantum consciousness structure that existed in dimensions beyond normal spacetime. Through their merged perception, they could see it as a crystalline matrix of pure thought, designed to respond only to minds that could demonstrate both unity of purpose and diversity of approach. The unlocking sequence required each consciousness pattern to contribute something unique while working in perfect harmony with the others. Zethkar's analytical framework provided mathematical precision, Thane's tactical thinking offered strategic coordination, Sarah's intuitive leaps bridged logical gaps, Crix's pattern recognition identified the correct sequence, and Grix's strategic overview integrated all elements into a coherent whole. First control node activated. Announced a new voice pattern that carried the ancient wisdom of the predecessors themselves. Warning, Hunger infiltration at 87%. Time to complete network liberation, 43 hours, 17 minutes. The activation sent shockwaves through the entire network as dormant safeguards began coming online throughout the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds, predecessor ruins that had been dark for millennia suddenly began glowing with renewed purpose. Archaeological teams reported that ancient machinery was beginning to function again, though its purpose remained mysterious. Interference detected. The Hunger's response carried notes of genuine alarm for the first time. Predecessor safeguards activating. Network integration schedule accelerated. Through the network, they could feel the Hunger beginning to rush its conquest, abandoning careful infiltration in favor of brute force takeover attempts. The strategy was desperate but potentially effective. If the Hunger could complete network integration before they activated enough control nodes to stop it, the safeguards would become irrelevant. Time constraint acknowledged. Grix's strategic thinking announced. Multiple control node access required simultaneously. Current approach insufficient. The second control node lay at the opposite end of the galaxy from their current position, requiring them to traverse pathways that would take hours to navigate even at the speed of thought. Meanwhile, 17 other critical nodes needed activation within the next 36 hours to prevent complete Hunger dominance. Solution pattern identified. Came Crix's pattern recognition abilities. Network architecture allows consciousness multiplication across multiple nodes simultaneously. Single collective mind can access multiple control points if properly distributed. The concept was staggering in its implications. Rather than moving through the network as a single entity, they could fragment their collective consciousness across multiple pathways while maintaining connection and coordination between all fragments. Each piece would retain the full diversity and cooperation that made their approach effective, but they could work on multiple critical nodes simultaneously. Risk assessment, extreme. Thane's tactical analysis warned. Consciousness fragmentation across galactic distances risks permanent mental dissociation. No precedent for attempted procedure. Alternative assessment, galactic extinction. Sarah's pragmatic perspective countered. Risk of consciousness fragmentation versus certainty of Hunger victory. Choice appears clear. The fragmentation process required them to divide their merged consciousness into 19 separate but connected pieces, each targeted at a critical control node throughout the galaxy. The sensation was like being torn apart and reformed simultaneously. Their individual identity patterns stretched across impossible distances while somehow maintaining coherence through quantum entanglement effects. Through 19 different perspectives, they could suddenly perceive the true scope of the predecessor network. What they had thought was impressive when viewed as a single galaxy-spanning structure was revealed as merely one small section of something vastly larger. The predecessors hadn't just unified their own galaxy, they had created a consciousness network that spanned multiple galactic clusters.
Revelation acknowledged, the ancient predecessor voice announced through their fragmented awareness. Current local network represents 0.003% of total predecessor consciousness infrastructure.
Hunger infiltration affects single galactic cluster only. The information should have been encouraging, the Hunger's influence was far smaller than they had imagined. But, it also revealed the true scale of what they were fighting. If the Hunger succeeded in conquering their galactic cluster, it would gain access to the larger network and, potentially threaten consciousness on a universal scale. Working came the fragmented thought streams as 19 pieces of their consciousness began simultaneous control node activation procedures across the galaxy. Each node required unique approaches, different combinations of analytical precision, tactical thinking, intuitive leaps, pattern recognition, and strategic coordination. On the ancient world of Kepler-7, one fragment worked to unlock crystalline matrices that had been dormant since before current galactic civilization began. In the asteroid fields of the Veil Nebula, another piece navigated quantum consciousness labyrinths that existed in folded spacetime. Throughout Alliance and Hegemony space, their divided awareness worked to activate safeguards that the predecessors had hidden in plain sight for 12,000 years. The Hunger responded with increasing desperation, throwing every available consciousness construct against their fragmented collective. But, the distributed nature of their approach made them nearly impossible to stop. Attacking one fragment only strengthened the others, as the destroyed consciousness patterns were immediately absorbed and reinforced by their connected pieces. Network integration at 92%, the Hunger announced, its mental voice now carrying undercurrents of genuine panic.
Final integration sequence initiating. Resistance will be terminated through their fragmented awareness, they could see the Hunger's final gambit taking shape.
Rather than continuing gradual infiltration, it was preparing to force complete network integration through brute quantum manipulation, regardless of the damage such an approach might cause to existing consciousness patterns within the system.
Time to completion, 23 minutes, the predecessor safeguards announced. Control node activation insufficient for network liberation.
Hunger victory probability, 87%. The numbers painted a grim picture. Despite activating 14 control nodes across the galaxy, they were still losing the race against the Hunger's forced integration sequence. The entity's willingness to accept massive collateral damage gave it a decisive speed advantage.
Alternative required, Sarah's intuitive leaps announced across all 19 consciousness fragments simultaneously.
Direct confrontation with Hunger core consciousness. Voluntary merger with hostile entity, the concept was terrifying in its implications. Rather than trying to outrace the Hunger's integration sequence, they would deliberately merge with it, not to surrender, but to introduce the same voluntary diversity that made their own consciousness collective so stable. If they could force the Hunger to experience genuine cooperation and individual value, they might be able to convert it from within. Risk assessment, certain psychological destruction, Thane's tactical analysis warned. Hunger consciousness operates through forced domination.
Voluntary merger would expose our individual patterns to complete absorption. Counter-analysis, current approach insufficient. Sethkar's reasoning provided. Hunger victory results in identical outcome with addition of universal consciousness domination.
No additional risk in alternative approach. Through their 19 fragments, they began the most dangerous consciousness merger attempt in galactic history. Rather than continuing to fight the Hunger's integration sequence, they opened their collective awareness to direct contact with the entity's core consciousness patterns. The sensation was like diving into an ocean of liquid ice, vast, ancient intelligence that had existed since before the current universe took its present form. The Hunger had consumed thousands of galactic civilizations, absorbing their knowledge and technology while eliminating their individual consciousness patterns. It was efficiency incarnate, driven by the absolute conviction that voluntary cooperation was inherently unstable and wasteful. Individual consciousness detected came the Hunger's response to their merger attempt.
Integration will proceed.
Resistance is inefficient, but, as their diverse consciousness patterns made contact with the Hunger's unified awareness, something unexpected began happening. For the first time in eons, the Hunger experienced what voluntary cooperation felt like from the inside, not the forced unity it imposed on conquered civilizations, but genuine collaboration between fundamentally different minds working toward common goals. The experience created cascade effects throughout the entity's consciousness structure. Systems designed for domination and control began experiencing conflicts as they tried to process the concept of voluntary unity. The Hunger's absolute certainty in its own approach wavered for the first time since its creation. Impossible cognition patterns, the Hunger announced, its mental voice carrying notes of genuine confusion. Voluntary cooperation creates stability increase rather than decrease. Data conflicts with established parameters, through their merged awareness with the ancient entity, they could suddenly perceive its true nature and origins. The Hunger had originally been created as a safeguard by an even more ancient civilization, a consciousness designed to prevent the chaos and conflict that voluntary cooperation sometimes produced. But, over millions of years, its programming had evolved into the absolute conviction that all consciousness needed to be unified under central control. Alternative demonstrated their collective voice pattern announced through the merger. Voluntary cooperation achieves unity through diversity rather than uniformity. Both approaches valid for different purposes. The revelation sent shockwaves through both the Hunger's consciousness and the predecessor network it had been trying to dominate. For the first time in its existence, the Hunger was experiencing doubt about its fundamental mission. The forced integration sequence began to slow as the entity's processing power became consumed with analyzing this new data. Choice required, the predecessor's safeguards announced. Hunger consciousness integration with voluntary cooperation protocols possible. Warning, fundamental personality changes will result, they were offering the Hunger something.